Ever wondered what it's like to start your day by smashing ice with your bare hands just to scrub someone else's underwear? Welcome to the worst job you never wanted. You're not a noble. You're not a knight. You're a medieval washerwoman. And congratulations. That means your hands are about to be permanently pruned, your spine forever ruined, and your social life soaked in lye. Before you get comfortable, please hit like and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what I do. Drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's dive together into today's journey. You've just woken up, not by the gentle chirp of birds or the soft buzz of an alarm clock, but by a combination of freezing wind seeping through the thatch roof and the dull ache of your joints reminding you that your bed is a pile of straw and regret. You're a medieval washerwoman, which means luxury isn't even a rumor in your life. Your bed smells faintly of mildew, your blanket is shared with 2 kids and possibly a hen, and your morning routine begins with checking whether your water bucket is frozen solid overnight. Spoiler, it has. But no matter, because even if your fingers are too stiff to bend, the laundry won't clean itself, and you've got an entire village's worth of shirts, breeches, and unidentifiable linen blobs that smell like defeat. Welcome to the glamorous life of someone who touches more strangers' underpants than any noble ever will. Laundry in the Middle Ages was not a cute aesthetic. It wasn't 2 girls laughing by a stream while wringing out flower-scented sheets. It was a brutal, soul-flattening ritual of hauling water, boiling rags, pounding fabric with sticks, and praying your hands wouldn't fall off before noon. No one appreciated you, no one paid you well, and you were always damp, cold, and vaguely insulted by the very fabric you were trying to clean. First, you drag yourself to the river. Yes, the river. Because plumbing? That's for castles and dreams. The village well is too precious to waste on socks, and the communal bathhouse is more likely to give you fleas than soap. So you trudge a mile through the mud to your favorite little stretch of frigid, churning water, where the rocks are just sharp enough to bruise your knees, and the breeze off the surface cuts through your skirt like a blade. You're carrying a basket of dirty clothes that smells like someone lost a bet with a cow. Inside, there are layers of linen stained with everything from wine and stew to blood and bodily betrayal. People don't exactly treat their garments with respect. They wipe their faces, their hands, and sometimes their dogs on them. They drop them in chamber pots by accident. They give them to you with a half-hearted apology and a coin that would barely buy a crust of bread. Step 1. Soak it all, which means rolling up your sleeves, shoving your hands into the icy depths, and losing feeling in your fingers before you've even begun. Ever tried wringing out a woolen tunic with hands that feel like frozen sausages? It's a spiritual experience, mostly because your soul leaves your body around the 3rd shirt. Then comes the soap. Oh yes, soap. That luxurious item made from animal fat and lye, boiled until it resembled angry cheese and smelled like roasted guilt. If you're lucky, you make it yourself. If you're unlucky, you buy it off that one merchant who waters it down with crushed chalk and rat droppings. Either way, it burns. It burns your skin, your nostrils, and possibly your very sense of identity. Next is the scrubbing. You find the nearest flat rock, already slick with ice and moss, and begin the sacred rite of smashing each garment against it like you're punishing it for every bad decision you've ever made. Over and over, shirt, slam, hose, slam, undergarment with mysterious stains, slam harder. The water splashes your face, your apron's soaked, and now a goose is honking at you like you just insulted its lineage. And then, just as you've scrubbed half a noble's bedding set with enough force to dislodge the memory of sin, it starts to rain. Not gentle rain, medieval rain. Cold, stabbing, mud-producing misery from a sky that hates you personally. Does that mean you can stop? Of course not. Your quota is high. If you don't deliver clean linens by sunset, your pay gets docked. Or worse, the reeve tells everyone you're lazy, and now nobody wants to give you work. And the nobles? Oh, don't get me started. The lady of the manor has 24 pieces of linen for her delicate areas alone. She sends them down with her maid in a condescending little note like, "Please be gentle with the embroidery." Meanwhile, she's eating a roasted pheasant and sipping wine while you're wrestling her monogrammed bloomers out of a rock crevice. But here's the worst part. Once you've cleaned it all, boiled it all, wrung it out with wrists that now click when you move them, you still have to carry it back. Imagine this. You're soaked. You're covered in soap scum. Your shoes are full of river water. Your back feels like someone replaced your spine with gravel, and you've got 2 wicker baskets of damp laundry on either hip. The mud is now knee-deep, the wind has picked up, and a child just ran past and sneezed directly into your hair. You trudge back to the village, passing people who don't even look at you. Maybe one of them nods, maybe someone shouts, "Careful with my shirt," like that's a helpful thing to say to someone currently dragging her own organs behind her. Once home, it's not over, because now you must hang everything to dry. And dry is a generous term in a world without heaters, radiators, or reliable sunshine. You string ropes between trees or from beams in the ceiling, and hope the smoke from the fire doesn't dye everything beige again. Also, good luck with privacy. Everyone sees your laundry. There's no such thing as modesty when you're a washerwoman. Someone always wants to know why Sir Gregory's drawers are extra stained this week, or why Lady Agnes's shift smells like roses and treachery. The gossip is constant, and unfortunately, people often blame you for the stains, the tears, the fading colors. You are, after all, just the help, which means it's always your fault. But even with all this, you must keep smiling, or at least not actively screaming, because competition is fierce. Every village has 5 women just like you, ready to underbid you by a penny and tell the manor that you smelled like mildew last week. Reputation is everything. If you're too slow, too loud, too opinionated, you lose the job. And once you're no longer trusted with laundry, what's left? You can't farm. Your hands are too damaged. You're not marrying again. That ship sank when you were 23 and the local cooper ran off with the ale money. So you keep working, keep scrubbing, keep plunging your frostbitten hands into freezing filth and pretending not to hear the jokes the stable boys make about the things you probably find in the nobleman's linens. You keep nodding, smiling, scrubbing, breaking yourself, because that's what survival is. And let's not forget the smell. You always smell like wet cloth, lye, and cold. It seeps into your skin, your hair, your dreams. No matter how much you rinse, how long you bathe, you are the human embodiment of mildew. People step back from you in church, not because you're a sinner, though honestly, you've considered it, but because you reek of other people's sweat and economic despair. And yet, in a way, you're essential. No feast can be held without clean tablecloths. No noble can preen in silk until you've beaten the mud from the hem. No baby can be swaddled until you've soaked the swaddling in tears and river water. You are the ghost in the background of every medieval painting. The woman in the corner bent over a tub while someone else poses in luxury. And tomorrow, you'll do it all again. Let's say you've survived the first few years of washerwoman life. Congratulations. Your back is officially ruined. Your hands have turned into shriveled talons, and your knees now sound like someone walking across a pile of frozen lettuce every time you stand up. But hey, you're still working, and that means you're one of the lucky ones. And by lucky, we mean still barely alive, permanently wet, and tasked with cleaning the unimaginable from Lord Gerald's mystery-stained undershirt. There's a certain hierarchy to laundry in the Middle Ages, and spoiler, you're at the bottom of all of them. Even among other working women, washerwomen were known as the wet rats of the social ladder. You weren't glamorous like the seamstress or trusted like the midwife. You didn't make things. You just cleaned things that other people had ruined. People treated you like furniture with opinions. They'd hand you soiled linens with 2 fingers like they were delivering a cursed object, and they always had feedback. You used too much lye, Mildred. Did you forget the lavender sachet? This doesn't smell like rosemary, it smells like Tuesday. As if that blanket hadn't been wrapped around a vomiting baron all week. And God forbid you ruin anything, because if a noble's favorite smock comes back with a tear, one that was probably there already, you might find yourself banned from the manor. Not fired, because that would imply you were employed in a real sense. Just banished, which in medieval terms meant good luck eating this winter. Let's talk about volume. Your average wash day wasn't a dainty basket of folded handkerchiefs. No, it was more like hauling the entire textile output of a monastery through fire, water, and shame. Bedding, tablecloths, socks, rags, smocks, baby cloths, floor cloths, clothes for festivals, and, everyone's favorite, garments that hadn't been washed since the last papal crusade. There was no dry cleaning, there were no machines, it was just you, your tub, a paddle, and the relentless ticking clock of survival. And then there's the boiling, because sometimes water and soap weren't enough. Sometimes you had to haul your biggest iron pot, one that weighed roughly the same as a small donkey, fill it with water, and light a fire underneath just to disinfect the worst of it. Spoiled linens, flea-ridden sheets, or something the physician swore wasn't contagious, but also suggested you burn afterward. You'd stand by the pot, stirring the grayish stew of despair with a stick, while smoke stung your eyes and your dress slowly roasted on one side and froze on the other. Boiling took hours. The wood cost money, and the smell. Oh, the smell. A mix of wet wool, burned hair, and a hint of something died in this. Of course, the children were always underfoot, because you weren't just a washerwoman. You were probably a mother too. And unless you were rich, you weren't. You had no nursemaid. That meant you were trying to scrub year-old grease stains out of a tunic, while your toddler shoved rocks in their mouth and your eldest practiced sword fighting with a chicken. And no one helped, ever. Your husband, if he hadn't died in a farming accident or vanished during tax season, was off doing something that sounded important, but mostly involved sitting in a field and complaining. Your neighbors were busy, the priest was praying, the baker was scowling, the chickens were judging, and there you were, elbow deep in lie, listening to your own child explain how they found a bug in the soup but ate around it. Then came the delivery, because once it was clean, you had to return it. That meant carrying massive bundles of damp linens wrapped in cloth over your back while trudging across uneven cobblestones and trying not to trip over a goat. You'd knock on the manor door, assuming they even let you use the door and not the back gate, then stand there dripping and shivering while some maid examined every item like it was evidence in a royal scandal. Sometimes they'd smile, sometimes they'd toss you a crust of bread, and sometimes, if the Lord was feeling particularly generous, they'd pay you a few extra pennies and call you a strong lass, which sounded like a compliment until you realized he was staring at your forearms like you were a draft horse. And then came your least favorite chore, removing stains that were mysterious. You know the ones nobody wanted to explain, the ones no one made eye contact about, the ones you suspected came from either sin, sickness, or someone's late-night mistake involving wine and bad decisions. You didn't ask questions, you didn't want answers, you just boiled harder and prayed louder. Sometimes people whispered that washerwomen were unclean, not because of their job, but because of what they might know. You touched everyone's sheets, you washed away secrets, you saw things, and in a superstitious age where knowing too much was basically a death sentence, people were suspicious of the very woman they relied on to clean up their literal mess. And yet, you couldn't stop, because laundry was your living, and no matter how humiliating, exhausting, or bone-chillingly cold it got, it paid. Not well, but enough to scrape by, enough to keep your family alive, enough to stay out of the poorhouse. Barely. Now let's talk about winter. If you think laundry was hard in summer, try it in January. The river turns to slush. Your hands split open from the cold. Every garment freezes stiff in seconds. You can't hang things to dry because the air itself bites, so you huddle inside with wet linen strung across beams, dripping onto your head while you eat soup that tastes like wood and disappointment. And still, the nobles expect their clothing returned crisp, fresh, and blessed by angels. "This tunic smells smoky," Lady Edwina might complain. "Well, my lady," you want to say, "that's because I boiled it next to a fire that almost took my eyebrows off while your cousin accused me of cursing his underpants." But of course, you say nothing. You nod, you bow, you apologize, and you pray she doesn't report you to the steward, who has the power to ruin your life with a single raised eyebrow and a complaint about insolent behavior. Even your health starts to betray you. Washerwomen were constantly sick. The wet clothes, the cold water, the exposure to filth, it all added up. Your joints swelled, your lungs rattled, you coughed at night, and your fingers turned purple when the frost came. But there were no sick days, no warm bed to recover in. You just wrapped a rag around your nose, ignored the fever, and kept scrubbing until the floor spun, or you passed out into a tub of socks. And when you finally collapsed at the end of the day, soaked, aching, stinking of lye and sweat, you didn't get thanks, you didn't get rest, you got more laundry. "There's been a wedding," someone would say. "3 new guests in the manor," someone else would whisper. And suddenly another pile appeared like it had grown legs and marched over to ruin your spine. You cried sometimes, quietly, when no one was looking, because you couldn't stop. There was no safety net, no guild, no retirement, just the same cycle again and again, until your body gave out, or your reputation did, and even then, people remembered. "She used to do laundry," they'd say. "Broke her back scrubbing Lord Malcolm's linens," someone might whisper. "Died of cold and a broken rib, poor thing." And someone else would shrug and say, "Well, better her than me." South. You're soaked to the bone, your hands are cracked like overbaked bread, and you haven't felt your toes since Michaelmas. But somehow, you're still crawling forward, still working, because you have to. But here's the thing they don't tell you when you become a washerwoman. You don't just do laundry. You become the unofficial trash collector, filth manager, lice consultant, secret keeper, and on one memorable occasion, the person responsible for scrubbing human excrement out of a bishop's ceremonial robe. No explanation was given, no apology offered, just a thin smile and a coin that smelled like regret. Laundry wasn't only about clothes, it was also about status. And yours? Permanently low. You were like a ghost people could see, everywhere but invisible. The manor staff avoided eye contact, the townsfolk avoided the smell. Even other servants gave you the kind of sympathetic look normally reserved for someone who's just lost a bet with the plague. Because let's be honest, being a washerwoman wasn't just hard, it was dangerous. First, the chemicals, or as they called them back then, whatever we can scrape out of the fireplace and hope it doesn't dissolve our hands. You used lye made from wood ash. It worked, sure, but it also burned through fabric, skin, and dignity. You mixed it in open tubs with no gloves, no masks, and no idea whether the bubbling meant clean or incoming disaster. If you added stale urine, and you often did because it was a surprisingly common detergent, it got worse. The ammonia helped whiten linens, but it also made your washroom smell like Satan's outhouse during a heat wave. You got used to the smell, mostly. Everyone else just assumed you were dying from the inside out. And then there were the infestations. Because if there's one thing medieval clothing loved more than mud, it was life. Lice, fleas, and the occasional unidentifiable squirming thing. These were your coworkers. You'd shake out a tunic and watch half a plague fall out. Blankets, more like soft woolen hotels for things with too many legs. The worst were wool stockings, which had a tendency to trap bugs so tightly it was like unwrapping a living scroll of nightmares. And guess whose job it was to boil those things until the parasites stopped moving? That's right, you. And guess how often that worked? Let's just say the lice union was thriving. Now let's talk about customers. Not the nobles. They were too busy bleeding from mysterious ailments and drinking wine made from sadness. No, the trouble came from the middle class. Merchants, scribes, traveling priests. They had just enough money to feel important but not enough manners to be tolerable. They'd bring you bundles of laundry with specific instructions like don't wrinkle the cuffs, or please remove the wine stain, the blood stain, and the other red stain I can't identify. One even handed you his tunic with a wink and said, "You'll find the stain has personality." What does that even mean, Reginald? And if you made a mistake? If you dared return something with a crease in the wrong place or forgot to add rosemary to the rinse water, you'd be called lazy, sloppy, or worst of all, unsanitary, which is rich coming from someone who hadn't bathed since the feast of St. Catherine and regularly aired out his feet on the communal bread table. But of course, you said nothing. You took the insult. You bowed your head. You apologized, because the alternative was losing that client. And those few precious pennies meant the difference between soup and boiling your own shoe leather for dinner. Let's not forget the laundry accidents. Ever tried washing a heavy woolen cloak in a fast-moving river? Picture this. You're waist deep in a current that's stronger than your will to live, clinging to a slippery rock with one hand while beating a tunic against another rock with the other. One wrong move and splash, it's gone, swept away like your dreams of owning a second pair of socks. You chase it, of course, because that cloak is worth more than your entire week's income. But the river is fast, your legs are weak, and now your only hope is to run 3 miles downstream and pray it gets caught on a branch, or that you don't get caught stealing when you return it, soaking wet and missing the fancy trim. And if it wasn't the river, it was the fire. Remember that boiling pot from last time? Well, it sometimes boiled over, or exploded, or the wind caught a stray spark and lit the drying rack like a signal to every angry laundry client within 10 miles. You couldn't win. Wet? Useless. Burned? Irresponsible. Clean but slightly scorched? Oh dear, it smells like tragedy. Speaking of drying, here's a fun fact. Medieval weather didn't care about your schedule. You couldn't just hang things out and expect sunshine. More often than not, the clouds laughed in your face and dumped rain the moment you walked away. So you brought the wet clothes inside, strung them across beams, and hoped the cat didn't mistake them for a new litter box. The result? A home that smelled like wet dog, mildew, and someone's idea of herbal purification gone wrong. Every surface was damp, the walls wept, the air was thick with despair and time, and heaven help you if your husband complained about it. Oh, does the house smell, dear? Perhaps you'd like to try doing the laundry while our children gnaw on rocks and the roof leaks onto your soup. But there were moments, tiny flickers, where things almost felt worth it, like when a grateful customer slipped you an extra coin, or a kind old woman gave you a hot bun after you returned her linen still warm from the fire, or when the sun actually came out, and your drying line looked like a banner of small victories. And maybe, just maybe, you caught yourself smiling, just for a second. Before the goose knocked over the tub, the toddler dropped a spoon down the well, and someone shouted, "Mildred, we've had a terrible accident in the guest bedchamber." Back to work. Because the laundry never stopped. People always sweated, always bled, always stained, always somehow soiled everything within arm's reach. It was like living inside a never-ending cycle of grime. And you were the gear that made it all go. You weren't just washing clothes, you were erasing evidence, rewriting messes, holding society together with one cracked knuckle at a time. You were invisible, but essential. And if you ever dared to stop, if you ever said no more, even for a day, someone would call you lazy, useless, replaceable, as if it wasn't you who scrubbed the filth off their sins, folded their vanity into neat stacks, and boiled their shame into silence. But you kept going, because you had to, because no one else would. By now, you don't have fingerprints anymore. They've been scoured off by lie, winter wind, and 12 years of scrubbing dried vomit out of jerkin collars. Your spine has the curve of a question mark, your knees crack like firewood, and your vision blurs every time you lift a bucket. You're not even 40, but you look 75, on a good day, and still you wake before sunrise, haul water, boil linens, beat fabric, and wring shirts that once belonged to people who wouldn't recognize you if you lit their house on fire. You've become a background character in your own life, someone who appears with the laundry and vanishes with the smell. Let's talk about your tools, because they're garbage. That paddle you used to beat clothes in the tub? It's cracked and splintered and gave you a permanent callus that looks like a third thumb. The soap? You made it yourself from fat and ash, and it smells like a regret sandwich. The bucket? It leaks. The tub? It leaks. The roof over your tub? Oh yes, that leaks too. Everything leaks except the money, and still you keep going. Because the church says suffering makes you holy, the town says work makes you useful, and your landlord says none of that matters if you're late on rent. You've stopped dreaming of better. You now dream of dry. Sometimes though, when the wind isn't freezing your earlobes off and the children aren't screaming because they found a toe in the soup, your mind wanders. You wonder what it's like to own something clean. Not clean because you scrubbed it for an hour and boiled it twice. Clean because no one ever dirtied it in the first place. A linen shirt that smells like lavender and possibility. But that's not for you. Your job is to carry everyone else's mess and return it like a miracle. Spotless, folded, perfumed, and smiling. Let's be honest, washerwomen were walking contradictions. You lived among filth but were expected to be clean. You handled waste but were forbidden to speak of it. You saw the stains of sin in birth and death, but were meant to say nothing, feel nothing, know nothing. You knew who had the flux before the physician did. You knew who had a mistress based on how many bedsheets showed up midweek. You knew which noble had bladder trouble, which monk sweated wine, which cook bled into his apron and hoped no one noticed. You washed away the secrets of an entire village, then were told you were beneath it. But it didn't end there, not by a long shot, because once your body started breaking down, things got worse. You couldn't work as fast, you dropped things, you lost feeling in your hands. Clients noticed. The work isn't as sharp, they'd say. She's slipping. No one ever asked why. No one ever helped. Eventually, they stopped bringing you laundry altogether. And that was the most terrifying thing of all. Because if you weren't scrubbing, you weren't earning. And if you weren't earning, you weren't eating. There were no pensions for broken women, no rest homes for laundresses who could no longer lift a tub. You were either useful or invisible, working or starving. Some washerwomen died in their tubs. Some died on the way to the river. Some just disappeared. faded out of memory like old stains that finally gave up. If you were lucky, your daughter took over. You taught her how to fold napkins, how to rinse with vinegar, how to spot the difference between old wine and fresh blood. You passed on your knowledge like it was a treasure, because it was. Not noble knowledge, not scholarly knowledge, survival knowledge. And if you didn't have a daughter, then the line ended with you. One less pair of cracked hands in the river, one less woman bent over a boiling pot, one less ghost in the background. It's strange, isn't it? People remember kings and warriors and poets. They build statues of priests and explorers and queens with hair like sunlight, but no one ever builds a statue of the woman who kept their linens white. The woman who scraped, boiled, dried, and folded behind every feast, every sermon, every battlefield. No one remembers her name, but she was there. She was always there, and maybe, just maybe, that's why we should. Because history doesn't smell like parchment and oil lamps. It smells like sweat. It smells like old socks. It smells like her. You're standing at the splintered gates of your hometown, clutching a threadbare satchel and wondering which will get you first, the mud, the bandits, or the dysentery. Spoiler, it's probably all three in that order, with bonus blistered feet for dessert. Your grand plan is simple. Walk from this anonymous patch of nowhere to the shimmering wonder that is Paris. You have no horse, no map, and exactly 3 copper coins rattling like judgment in your purse. Still, the minstrel at last week's fair swore the streets of Paris are lined with opportunity. He also had 6 fingers and smelled like fermented onions, but optimism is cheaper than ale, so off you go. The road out of town is less a road and more an elongated puddle framed by bushes that rustle ominously whenever the wind, or something hungrier, passes through. Travelers warned you about robbers in the forests, yet nobody mentioned the aggressive geese guarding the first mile. The villagers call them Sir Hiss and Lady Peck's a lot. You call them a feathery omen that this journey may involve more honking terror than divine destiny. You sprint past, shoes squirting mud like ill-timed fountains, dignity already dented. By midday, the mud has dried into stylish crusts that crack every time you bend your knees. The sun reveals exactly how threadbare your cloak is. The seams gape like a gossip's mouth. You share the road with 2 ox carts, a monk chanting psalms badly off-key, and a funeral procession for a pig that apparently meant something to somebody. The air smells of manure, incense, and grief. Welcome to the ultimate medieval perfume. Hunger sets in roughly 3 leagues from home. You packed a loaf of yesterday's bread. Today it has the texture of roof tile and the flavor of self-reproach. You gnaw anyway, nearly chipping a tooth. Around you stretch endless fields of stubble, guarded by scarecrows so mangy even crows refuse to land. You consider stealing a turnip from a nearby plot, but imagine the landowner's dogs tasting peasant calf and rethink. Paris can wait, intact legs can't. Night approaches, bringing colder winds and fresh existential dread. You need shelter. The nearest inn advertises itself with a swinging sign depicting a lopsided goat. Inside, the common room seethes with travelers nursing watery ale and suspicious attitudes. The innkeeper looks at your coins like they're counterfeit, then gestures to the floor by the hearth. The luxury suite. It's warm if you wedge between a snoring peddler and a merchant's crate of questionable eels. You lie awake listening to woodlice chewing the beams and pondering whether fame ever requires sleeping next to seafood. At dawn, you pay an extra halfpenny for a splash of watered ale pretending to be breakfast. Outside, frost sparkles on the ruts. Your travel companions for the morning are 2 mercenaries who introduce themselves as Ulrich and also Ulrich. Twins poorly differentiated except by the number of scars. They're headed toward a skirmish somewhere vaguely east, but will walk with you until the crossroads. You pretend their company makes the road safer, while privately noting they eye your satchel the way wolves eyeball unattended lambs. The forest looms, all tangled branches and territories patrolled by bandit guilds, too unruly to pay taxes, yet organized enough to run intermittent toll booths. Sure enough, a man in mismatched armor pops from behind a stump demanding voluntary donations. You prepare to hand over your last coin when the Ulrichs crack knuckles, draw daggers, and politely inform the toll collector he's undervaluing his liver. He backs away fast as a crab. You breathe again, realizing friendship sometimes comes prepackaged with homicidal tendencies. Handy, if unsettling. Past the forest, the land flattens into marshy stretches buzzing with mosquitoes that treat exposed skin like an all-you-can-eat tavern. You slap yourself raw, humming a tune to distract from the welts erupting everywhere. The rutted ground sucks at your boots until one disappears entirely. The remaining shoe sulks alone. You now walk lopsided, attracting sideways glances from itinerant priests who surely suspect demonic possession. You'd explain, but your Latin is limited to "where is the ale?" And, forgive me, neither useful in this context. Mid-afternoon brings a roadside shrine dedicated to Saint Disappointed of Expectation. Pilgrims have left wilted flowers and prayers scrawled on parchment. You kneel, partly for spiritual insurance, partly to rest your spine, and whisper a request for unbandited passage to Paris. A gust of wind promptly smacks the shrine door, revealing a hollow interior containing a single moldy cheese rind. Interpret that as you will. You choose to see it as cosmic comedy rather than insult. The next village greets you with suspicious silence broken by a lone rooster crowing at an hour roosters usually file complaints. Houses stand empty, doors ajar. You tiptoe through, expecting plague carts. Instead, you find the villagers clustered at the far end, cheering two old women engaged in a ferocious cabbage-throwing contest. Apparently the annual St. Scurvy's Day festivities. You slip past unseen, pocketing a stray cabbage for dinner. When survival is at stake, morality is negotiable. Evening falls again. With coin reserves depleted, you seek free lodging in a hayloft. The farmer agrees in exchange for mucking stalls. You accept, inhaling barn aromas that redefine pungency. While shoveling, you contemplate why Paris matters so much. Maybe it's the notion of streets lit by torches instead of moonlight, of taverns where the ale doesn't taste like wet regret, of art and ideas, and maybe a baker who sells bread softer than limestone. Hope, after all, is the only luggage that doesn't weigh you down. Dawn number 3 delivers rain, incessant, sideways, reasoning-proof rain. Your cloak, never exemplary, now behaves like a sponge with inferiority issues. Puddles camouflage potholes, you step into one, plunging calf-deep and discovering water of an iciness that rivals monkish discipline. Moments later, a passing cart drenches you head to toe, prompting language that would scandalize saints. The driver shouts an apology involving a goat and salvation. You doubt both. The road converges with a long Roman causeway, still solid centuries after its engineers turned to dust. Progress quickens until a patrol of local militia halts travelers, checking papers you do not possess. Your explanation, that you're a humble pilgrim seeking Parisian enlightenment, earns skeptical sniffs. They debate whether to fine you, flog you, or both. Salvation appears in the form of a plague rumor. Someone up road is coughing blood. The guards scatter like pigeons before lunchtime, leaving you free but vividly aware that pestilence travels faster than gossip. You reach an abbey renowned for hospitality, only to learn the monks have instituted a work-for-supper scheme. You spend hours illuminating manuscripts by holding candles so a real scribe can see, your arms shaking while he embellishes saintly margins with grinning demons that look suspiciously like the abbot. Supper is thin pottage with floating mystery bits. The abbot blesses you, but the blessing sounds like "don't steal the spoons." You had no intention, but now you consider it on principle. Rest is fleeting. Chanting fills the night every time you start dreaming of dry socks. At sunrise, you leave with a crust of bread and a head full of Latin you half understand. The landscape shifts to rolling vineyards, an encouraging sign that civilization, or at least decent wine, lies ahead. You sample a grape, discover it's sour as betrayal, and move on, feet blistered, spirit dented yet unbroken. By the time you spot distant city walls, no, not Paris, merely a middling town boasting a market, you're limping visibly. The Ulrich twins parted ways days ago after accepting employment, dueling each other for a baron's entertainment. You miss them, in the way one might miss a rabid guard dog that at least barked at intruders. Alone again, you enter the market square, senses assaulted by smells both divine and diabolical. Roasting meat, fresh bread, unwashed humanity. Your lone coin buys a cup of watered wine that promises courage and delivers stomach cramps. A street performer juggling knives attracts a crowd. One blade slips, lodging into a barrel beside you. The performer bows, claims it's part of the act, and passes a hat. You drop your final cabbage leaf, technically payment, and he grins like that's the finest tip all day. Maybe it is. Maybe everyone's running low on everything except audacity. As twilight paints the rooftops crimson, you secure lodging in a stable corner, sharing straw with a donkey named Benedict. Judging by the kick he almost delivers, Benedict disapproves of your face. You apologize, explain the hardships of travel, and receive braying that sounds alarmingly like laughter. Even livestock mock your ambitions now. You curl under your cloak, damp and flea-bitten, whispering to the night that Paris had better be worth the splinters in your soul. Sleep comes in shards. Somewhere nearby a woman screams at a pickpocket. Elsewhere, a minstrel warbles a tune about doomed lovers and unpaid debts. Rain drips through the stable roof, tracing cold lines down your neck. You dream of paved streets, bright torches, and bread that bends. Then you dream of rivers flooding, bridges collapsing, and bandits counting your hope like coins. You wake unsure which is prophecy, which memory, and which mere nightmare born of spoiled wine. Morning arrives pale and unforgiving. You drag your aching body toward the town gate, silently bargaining with every saint whose name you recall. Just one more mile, one more day, one more heartbeat closer to Paris. The guard waves you through without inspection. Either you look too poor to tax or too diseased to detain. You take the win. Ahead lies another stretch of road, another gamble with weather, wolves, and men desperate enough to become wolves. Paris still rests leagues away, a rumor wrapped in cathedral bells. Your feet bleed through cracked boots, but you keep walking, because the alternative is to stop. And stopping, in this world, means letting the mud close over your ankles and claim you for the worms. Onward then, through the grit and the bandits chasing the slim miracle that you might one day set eyes on those distant, storied spires. Let Paris be ready. You're bringing mud, bruises, and a tale that reeks of survival. And if the city's gates close before you arrive, well, there's always Rome, they say, a shorter death by sunshine and papal taxes. You adjust your satchel, square your shoulders, and step into the next puddle. It's deeper than expected, naturally, but you laugh. Because if medieval Europe has taught you anything so far, it's that the mud always wins. Unless you keep walking, you wake to find that something has chewed on your boot. Not stolen, just chewed. Probably a rat. Possibly Benedict the donkey, who glares at you from across the stable as if you've somehow insulted his lineage. You take a moment to adjust your expectations for the day, downgrade your hopes, and squeeze water from your cloak with the kind of resigned patience that only comes from having absolutely no alternative. Today's leg of the journey begins with fog. Thick, wet, disorienting fog that muffles sound and makes every tree stump look like a lurking bandit. You follow a rut in the road and hope it leads somewhere real, and not just a bog waiting to consume your lower half. For breakfast, you chew on the crust of monastery bread, which has achieved the density of structural masonry. It's possible that monks bake it this way to punish sin through dental challenge. You don't know. You're too hungry to ask theological questions. By mid-morning, the fog thins enough for you to see the shape of a fellow traveler up ahead. You catch up, cautiously. It turns out to be a man pushing a cart filled with jars of pickled eels and a broken lute. He introduces himself as Maestro Felix, professional minstrel, amateur prophet, and part-time eel salesman. He offers to sell you a song for half a coin or an eel for a wink and a compliment. You politely decline both. He offers directions instead, straight through the valley. Avoid the crossroads at dusk and never make eye contact with a goat wearing bells. You don't ask, you've learned not to. The road descends into marshy terrain again, where puddles have ambitions of becoming lakes and frogs leap with reckless joy at your every footstep. A woman wading through the mire offers to sell you a charm against swamp fever. It's a piece of string with a feather tied to it. You buy it anyway, not because you believe it works, but because in medieval Europe, superstition is cheaper than medicine and often just as effective. Plus, she throws in a warning. Don't drink from the blue wells. They remember things. You're pretty sure that's nonsense, but again, you don't ask. You make it to the next village just in time for the market. It smells like unwashed humanity, spoiled cabbage, and the faint, hopeless sweat of someone trying to sell moldy garlic as a love potion. You try to blend in, but blending requires that you look less like a peasant who slept in straw with a cheese thief. A suspicious vendor eyes you as if you've come to steal his turnips. A child throws a plum at your head. You're unsure if this is aggression or flirtation. The village well has a sign over it. Do not drink. Cursed by Widow Branca, third Tuesday of Lent. You fill your flask anyway. You're not superstitious, just thirsty and statistically unlikely to suffer a second curse before dinner. As you leave the market, a commotion breaks out. A thief has been caught. He tried to steal a pigeon. Not eat it, not cage it, just steal it. The crowd surrounds him, yelling, laughing, pelting him with breadcrumbs and judgment. You inch away, remembering the stalks in the last town and the smell of spoiled turnips in public disgrace. You've stolen nothing, but in medieval towns your face alone can be incriminating if you look poor enough. You do. The road narrows as you head westward. Hills rise around you like judgmental shoulders. Birds scream overhead, either crows or souls of the damned, you're not sure. Somewhere along the ridge you spot smoke, a campfire. Too far for comfort. You keep moving, faster now until you reach a fork in the road. One path leads through a dense wood. The other skirts the edge of a crumbling Roman aqueduct, rumored to house ghosts, outlaws, and one particularly vindictive goat. You weigh your options, bandits or possibly cursed ruins. In true medieval fashion, you choose the one less likely to require explaining hoof prints on your chest, the aqueduct. The stone arches loom over you, moss-covered and ancient. You feel small beneath them, like an afterthought to a forgotten empire. The wind whispers through the stones in a way that sounds suspiciously like your name. You hum a tune to block it out and clutch your satchel closer. Halfway across the stretch, a voice hails you. A man in a cloak steps from behind a pillar, holding a staff topped with chicken bones and what may be a mummified ferret. "I am the Oracle of the Fallen Waters," he declares. You nod solemnly, because what else do you do? He offers to bless your journey in exchange for half your remaining bread. You hand it over. He taps your forehead, mutters something about destiny and the muddy path, and disappears into the stones. You're starting to understand why nobody writes cheerful songs about travel in the Middle Ages. Evening falls just as you reach a crumbling bridge. A sign reads, "Cross at your own risk. Trolls no longer tolerated." You pause, wait, look around. No trolls, but plenty of creaks from the wood that suggest structural failure is eager to meet you. You crawl across on hands and knees, muttering prayers to saints whose names you invent as you go. Saint Plank of Reinforcement, Saint Cordelia of Don't Let It Snap, Saint Bridget of Safe Passage and Functional Carpentry. On the other side, the land opens into flat farmland, where you spot a cottage with smoke rising from the chimney. You knock. A weary woman opens the door. Her eyes scan your face, your boots, your satchel. She doesn't ask questions. She just points to the barn. You sleep beside a cow who chews cud with the smugness of someone not traveling across France on foot. Rain pounds the roof. The straw smells of mildew and someone's poor decision. You fall asleep wondering what Paris smells like. Cinnamon? Soap? Hope? In the morning, the woman gives you a bowl of gruel and a warning. Avoid the northern path. Bandits have set up a checkpoint. They ask for tolls and then take your boots. You thank her and take the southern path. It's longer, but you like your boots, such as they are. Plus, you're starting to suspect your ankles are held together by sheer spite. By midday, you pass a funeral. Not the usual solemn affair. This one involves loud music, chickens, and someone firing arrows at a scarecrow that has the deceased's name painted on it. Apparently, it's a good riddance sort of send-off. You don't ask. You've learned the Middle Ages are a buffet of weird customs and lower back pain. In the next village, a tavern door creaks open and a man hurls himself out, landing at your feet. "Don't play dice with the bishop's nephew," he groans. You nod and keep walking. Wisdom often arrives in someone else's bruises. Your stomach growls. You're down to foraging, which today means wild onions and something that might be berries or might be a mistake. A hedgehog glares at you from the bushes as if to say, "You're the intruder here." You apologize. It doesn't forgive you. Later that night, you sleep in a hollow tree, curled like a medieval cinnamon roll, wet and undercooked. Your cloak is now so full of holes it resembles political policy. Something howls in the distance, possibly a wolf, possibly someone reading local poetry aloud. As you drift off, you dream of Paris again. Towers, warm hearths, bread not made of despair. But mostly, you dream of boots that fit and a blanket not shared with wildlife. You've survived another day. That's the victory. That's the miracle. You remind yourself you're one step closer, even if that step is limping, blistered, and smells faintly of cabbage and regret. You wake up to find something sniffing your face. It's either a curious fox or a very bold rat. You blink, it blinks, and the game of medieval chicken begins. Fortunately, you win. It scurries off, probably to write a scroll about your breath. Your legs don't work properly. Your back sounds like a windmill collapsing every time you move. But you're alive, which in medieval travel terms means you're basically thriving. You chew a piece of bark for breakfast. You tell yourself it's rustic. Today's road is flatter, but that's a lie told by optimistic maps and monks who never had to walk it. The mud is ankle deep and sucks at your boots like a peasant tax collector. You pass a man trying to rescue his ox from a puddle. It's not going well. You help by offering moral support and a stick. He thanks you by not throwing something at your head, a rare moment of medieval courtesy. Around midday, you stumble upon a wayside shrine dedicated to Saint Drogo, patron of coffee and unattractive people. You consider praying, but you're not sure if the saint takes requests for better footwear and internal peace. Instead, you borrow a moment of shade and eat your last onion, raw, like the desperate pilgrim you are. A bee lands on your nose. You let it. Maybe it will carry word of your suffering to someone who cares. The road finally leads to another town. This one has a wall, which is impressive, and a gate guard who seems determined to prevent joy. He eyes your ragged state, your suspicious lack of horse, and your general vibe of "I once slept in a bucket." You tell him you're a humble traveler. He tells you your face says vagrant with ideas. Still, he lets you through, eventually, after you hand over the last coin you had hidden in your sock. You don't even mind. You were starting to forget what money felt like. Inside, the town is bustling. That's code for full of people yelling at livestock. There's a public fountain you're definitely not supposed to wash in. You do anyway. A goose honks at you in disapproval. You honk back. Respect is earned. You try to barter for food at the market, offering the only thing you have left of value, a story. A woman selling pickled plums listens to your tale of the cursed aqueduct and the talking ferret oracle. She doesn't believe you, but she gives you a plum out of sheer pity. You bite into it. It's half worm. You eat the other half anyway. Protein. At the edge of town, you meet a tinker with a strange cart full of spoons, bells, and suspicious-looking ointments. He claims to know a shortcut to Paris. You are wary. His beard has birds nesting in it, but he draws a map in the dirt, and it looks almost believable. You decide to trust him. That's how far you've fallen. Beard bird men are now trustworthy. You leave the town at sunset because apparently you hate yourself. The shortcut leads through a forest that smells of damp secrets and old bread. You whisper a prayer to Saint Lost Cause and trudge on. The forest is alive with noise. Owls judging you, twigs breaking under your clumsy feet, and once, something that sounds exactly like the word run. You don't run. You shuffle faster, which is your current top speed. By moonlight, you reach a clearing where several other travelers are camped. You approach slowly, and, hands up, smile set to non-threatening. They let you sit by the fire. They share stew, which might contain actual food. It tastes like hope and mystery meat. You don't ask, but your fellow travelers are a mix of pilgrims, traders, and one woman who says she's searching for her runaway chicken. No one questions it. One man plays a fiddle, badly. Another tells a ghost story so awful it might summon something. You all laugh. It's the first time in days. That night, you sleep wrapped in your cloak, using your satchel as a pillow and your trauma as a mattress. Something scurries past your feet. You ignore it. If it's not stealing your teeth, it's not your problem. In the morning, you wake to find the camp deserted. They left before dawn, probably didn't want to share breakfast. Or maybe the chicken woman wasn't joking, and her bird led them away. You don't know. You do find a scrap of bread near the ashes. You eat it. It tastes like old socks. You cry a little, but only on the inside. The path now takes you through the foothills, which is just a fancy way of saying, welcome to stairs but natural and mean. The uphill climbs are brutal. The downhill stretches are worse. Gravity is not your friend. You fall twice. A sheep watches you without blinking. You feel judged. You pass a monastery built into the side of a cliff. The monks there practice silence and give you soup by nodding aggressively toward a pot. You accept, grateful. You slurp it loudly just to spite their vow. The abbot raises one eyebrow. You think you've just made a lifelong enemy. You'll take it. A monk points you toward a pass through the hills, and you follow. The path narrows, the rocks get sharper, your feet scream in medieval Morse code. Stop! Stop! What did we ever do to deserve this? Eventually, you come to a sign carved into stone. Beyond here, wolves, witches, and tax collectors. You consider turning back. Then you remember what's behind you. Mud, betrayal, and soup side eyes. Forward it is. By nightfall, you reach a hamlet. Population, 6 people and a pig named Justice. The locals look at you the way one might look at a damp rat with a dream, but they feed you turnip stew and let you sleep under the cart. It's an upgrade. While trying to sleep, you overhear a conversation about a bridge being out up ahead. Something about a flood, a mule, and a baker's curse. Details are vague, but you get the idea. Your path is blocked, again. In the morning, you attempt to reroute, which is medieval for a wander into the unknown with low expectations. You end up following a riverbank, which is great until you slip and spend 30 seconds underwater, reflecting on your life choices. You come up coughing, wet, and slightly cleaner than before. Small victories. You stumble into a shepherd's camp. He offers you a drink from his flask. It's something fermented, possibly socks. You accept. It burns all the way down. You're now warm, drunk, and convinced you can wrestle a goat. You do not wrestle the goat. The goat wins. You sleep in the grass. The stars above are beautiful, silent, and completely unbothered by your suffering. You envy them. When you wake, you find a note pinned to your cloak. It says, "Beware the road to St. Loup." The innkeeper has opinions and a crossbow. No signature. You believe it anyway. You wake up groggy, mouth full of grass, heart full of dread. A goat is sitting on your chest, possibly the same one that beat you last night. It snorts and hops off, clearly triumphant. You can't tell if you're hungover, concussed, or both. Either way, you're back on the road. The sign says you're 20 leagues from Paris. That's promising. Except that in medieval units, a league is just how far someone could walk before regretting it. You calculate, about 100 regrets to go. The sun is out for once. You want to enjoy it, but the heat turns the mud to glue. Every step now requires the strength of 10 men and the emotional resilience of a snail. You pass a field where peasants are reaping grain. One of them waves. You wave back and instantly regret it when your shoulder gives out like a collapsing siege tower. As noon approaches, you find yourself in the village of St. Loup. You remember the note. Innkeeper has opinions and a crossbow. You wonder what kind of opinions require a weapon. Turns out, aggressive ones. The innkeeper, Madame Blanche, is a woman of enormous presence, zero patience, and a voice like a battle horn. She demands to know who you are, what you want, and whether your donkey is house-trained. You have no donkey. She scowls deeper, as if that's your fault. You trade a favor for a meal. The favor is helping her re-roof a shed. You're halfway through when the sky opens up and dumps an ocean on your head. Welcome to medieval construction. You eat dinner soaked, bruised, and suspicious of the stew's ingredients. It tastes like despair and maybe squirrel. You ask if there's a bed. She laughs so hard she nearly dislocates something. You sleep on a bench, next to a man snoring in Middle English. At some point during the night, a cat sits on your face. You accept this. It is what you deserve. At dawn, Madame Blanche tosses a piece of bread at your head and tells you to walk faster. You're not sure if that's advice or a threat. Either way, you obey. The path to Paris narrows into a stone trail built back when Rome still believed in itself. You pass a mile markers carved by hands long dead. You feel their ghostly judgment. Even the rocks seem to whisper, "Should have stayed home." You run into 2 knights traveling the same way. They're arguing over poetry, not love poetry, battle poetry. One of them thinks metaphors are for cowards. The other threatens to joust him with a quill. They invite you to join their camp for lunch. You agree, mostly because you smell their sausages before you see them. As you eat, they regale you with stories of tournaments, dragons, definitely exaggerated, and one bard who insulted a bishop so thoroughly he was turned into a monk out of spite. You laugh, you forget your blisters. For a moment, you remember that even in this cold, muddy century, some people find joy in rhymes and roasted meat. The knights take the northern fork, you take the south. Their path is likely quicker, but involves toll bridges and noble egos. Yours has thorns and a hermit who charges tolls and riddles. When you answer wrong, he throws an onion at you. It hits squarely. You take it as a blessing. You're close now, so close. You can feel it in the air, thicker, busier, vaguely cheese-scented. Paris must be near. Then you hear it, hooves, fast, many. You dive into a bush, praying to every saint you remember, including Saint Misstep and Our Lady of Not Dying Today. A group of riders thunders past. They're not bandits. They're messengers, maybe nobles, maybe just adrenaline addicts. Either way, you survive. Again. When you emerge, you discover the bush was full of thistles. Your clothes now look like you lost a fight with a porcupine. The good news is, you no longer look robbable. The bad news is, you no longer look employable either. That night, you camp by a river. A group of washerwomen sings on the far bank. You watch them scrub linen against stones, laughing like they haven't spent the whole day in cold water. You want to ask them how they keep going. You want to ask them if they've seen Paris, but you're too tired to shout across a river. You dream of food that doesn't come from pockets, of shoes that match, of silence not broken by chickens. In the morning, you wake to the sound of bells, real bells, not warning bells, but church bells, civilization, human density, possibly an outhouse. You crest a hill and see it, Paris, not the golden dream you pictured, not clean, not sweet smelling. It sprawls, wheezes, steams, but it's real. Towers and bridges, carts and people, smoke and stone. You've made it. You're here. You limp into the city with the swagger of someone who's seen death, talked to an eel prophet, been hit by onions, and lived to tell the tale. The guards at the gate look at you, then at each other, then wave you in. They assume no one smelling like that is a threat. Inside, it's chaos. Noise, mud, music, shouting. Someone throws a cabbage at someone else. A monk chases a goose. You see a man juggling knives and 3 drunk priests trying to sing in harmony. You are home. Not because Paris is your home, but because suffering recognizes its own. You join the flow, stumble into a crowd, and are swept toward the cathedral, the market, the inn, the bakery, everywhere and nowhere at once. You find a tavern and order a bowl of something warm. You don't ask what. You eat it in 3 bites. You order more. A man next to you tells you his name is Etienne and asks where you've come from. You start to answer, but you stop. Because how do you explain a journey like that? How do you fit blistered feet, haunted bridges, vengeful goats, cursed soup, and philosophical nights into a single story? You just say, far. And Etienne nods like he understands. You sleep that night in a bed, an actual bed. It sags in the middle and smells faintly of mold, but it is off the ground. You lie there, stunned, wondering what to do now that you're no longer moving. You dream of mudless roads and hot bread. And in the morning, when you step out onto the stone street, the sun is shining, the bells are ringing, and somewhere in the distance, a donkey brays. Maybe it's Benedict. You smile. You made it. And that, in this cursed century of fleas and saints and soup you'd rather forget, is nothing short of a miracle.
Imagine a world where your doctor greets you with blood-stained fingernails, diagnoses your headache as excess moonlight in the skull, and prescribes a generous helping of leeches, 2 for the pain, 1 for the drama. Welcome to medieval medicine, where survival is mostly luck, cure rates are measured and funerals avoided, and malpractice insurance is just hoping the patient dies before complaining. You wake at dawn to the smell of stale hay and last night's vomit, the default aroma of your practice. Your clinic is not a clinic, it's a drafty shed behind the tavern, furnished with a 3-legged stool, a table that once served as a chopping block, and shelves sagging under jars of unidentified goo. Outside, a line of coughing peasants waits, each clutching a coin and an organ they fear is about to escape their body. You clear your throat, careful, your own lungs might revolt, and announce that the doctor is in. Patient 1, a farmer's wife with a fever hotter than midsummer gossip. You examine her tongue, note that it is indeed present, and declare her humors unbalanced. The cure? Bleeding, obviously. You reach for your favorite knife, the sharp one that doubles as a cheese slicer, and open a vein with theatrical flair. Blood splatters the floor like avant-garde art. The farmer pales. You assure him this is normal. She faints. Excellent, the treatment is working. Next in line, a shepherd convinced his sheep have cursed him. He's covered in pustules that smell like they're planning a rebellion. You nod sagely, dip a rag into vinegar that's mostly water, and dab at the sores while chanting half-remembered Latin phrases. Then, for good measure, you place a leech directly on his forehead. It sticks, wiggles, and starts drinking like a monk at feast day. You charge extra for spiritual cleansing. Between patients you sterilize your tools, by which you mean wipe them on your sleeve and spit. Hygiene is a modern fantasy. You believe in stronger principles, smoke, superstition, and strong wine. Especially the wine. It keeps your hands from shaking and your conscience pleasantly blurred. A knock on the door reveals the local baron's steward dragging in a man who's been run through with a pitchfork. He's leaking more than the clinic roof. You examine the wound, cluck sympathetically, and decide on the cutting-edge procedure of stuff it with moss and hope. You pack the hole tight with herbs that might be parsley, tie it off with pig gut, and order the patient to drink a concoction of ale, honey, and crushed snails. He gurgles thanks or curses, you can't tell, and is hauled away for recovery, which is medieval for let's see what happens. Lunch is a crust of bread dipped in onion broth. You chew while mixing medicines, ground toad for seizures, powdered pearl for vanity, and a mysterious black paste labeled "Don't sniff." A midwife barges in requesting a tonic for a difficult birth. You hand her juniper berries soaked in wine and suggest a prayer to whichever saint is on duty. She leaves muttering that your handwriting resembles chicken tracks. You beam with pride. That's how you know you're writing real prescriptions. The afternoon brings a procession of ailments, gouty toes oozing like overripe fruit, eye infections that stare accusingly from swollen sockets, and a toothache so severe the patient begs for extraction. You oblige, gripping rusty pliers and yanking until something gives way, possibly the tooth, possibly his will to live. Either counts as success. You present the bloody prize like a knight displaying a dragon's head and pocket your fee, 3 eggs and half a candle. Between screams you consult your medical texts, ancient scrolls littered with contradictions. One claims migraines are caused by demons in the ears, another insists it's too much reading. You hedge your bets and treat both, chant an exorcism while shoving lavender in the patient's ear canal. Results inconclusive, but it smells better. Evening falls, bringing nobler clientele. A merchant arrives complaining of melancholy. He calls it a soul storm. You diagnose excess black bile, recommend leeching near the spleen, and prescribe a diet of boiled carrots and occasional dancing. He balks at the dancing. You compromise, vigorous walking while lamenting taxes. He pays in silver. You whistle a hymn of gratitude. Just as you're closing, a frantic monk bursts in, clutching a relic and sneezing blood. Plague rumors swirl like crows. You feel a prickle of fear, mostly for your own skin. You smear a pungent balm of garlic and tar under your nose, light a brazier of herbal smoke, and keep the monk at spear's length. Your advice: prayer, isolation, and more garlic than friends. He blesses you, coughs on the floorboards, and staggers out. You douse everything in cheap wine and call it purification. Night at last. You tally earnings: 2 silver coins, a live chicken, assorted vegetables, and a headache that hums like bagpipes. You pour yourself a cup of spiced wine, raise it to the dark rafters, and toast to another day of not dying. Tomorrow will bring more bleeding, more leeches, and more chances to guess which organ is failing now. Such is the life of a medieval healer. Dirty hands, bad advice, but business is booming, mostly because nobody else is crazy enough to do it. Your second day as a medieval healer begins with a scream. Not from a patient, yet, but from the pig tied to your doorframe. It's been possessed, allegedly. Or just hungry. Either way, it's a sign the sick are coming. The first visitor is a barefoot peasant boy holding his own severed toe like it's a keepsake. Farming accident, he says. You nod solemnly and suggest he count his blessings. He still has 9. You reach for your healing supplies, which include a dull knife, a moldy compress, and a bottle of soothing tincture, made mostly from rainwater and yesterday's wine. You douse the wound, slap on a bandage made from old undergarments, and charge him a chicken feather for the trouble. He limps out with a grateful smile and a future limp. Mid-morning brings the village blacksmith, muscles bulging, teeth not so much. He has a rage boil under his arm. You explain this is likely a result of overworked humors and possibly divine punishment for swearing during hammering. Your solution: a poultice made from crushed onions, pig lard, and crushed beetles, spread generously and left to rot. He grunts approval and promises to beat up anyone who questions your credentials. Finally, some respect. Your assistant shows up late. She's 11, sticky-fingered, and possibly named Maud. No one's certain. She sweeps the floor, reorganizes your leech jar, after one escapes, and insists her uncle was cured of goat fever by eating boiled leather. You consider trying it on your next patient. A messenger arrives from the local monastery. The abbot has a swelling and requests privacy. You grab your instruments, a blunt needle, a wooden tube for listening, which doesn't work, and a book of saintly prayers to hide behind when things get messy. You arrive to find the abbot sweating profusely and muttering about divine punishment. You diagnose heat, bad diet, and pride. The treatment? Cupping. You heat glass jars over flame and slap them onto his back, where they suction tight with a sound like regret leaving the body. The abbot yelps. You assure him that pain means the demons are confused and likely fleeing. Then you drain a small amount of blood, because why not, and give him a potion of dried nettles, honey, and crushed beetroot. He thanks you by handing over a slightly moldy loaf of bread. You accept it like it's gold. Back at your clinic, chaos reigns. A line stretches around the dung cart. Word has spread that you fixed the abbot. That's good for business, bad for your schedule. You work through patients like a possessed monk. One woman complains that her baby cries too much. You peer at the red-faced infant, then hand her a pouch of lavender to hang over the crib and a charm made from baked dirt, blessed by a nun. It was you, wearing a curtain. The baby stops crying, not because of the charm but because it's finally asleep. Still counts. Next, a man with a cough so violent it could shake shingles off a roof. You suspect early plague, or possibly dust inhalation. You recommend burning herbs in his bedroom, sleeping upright, and drinking warm ale mixed with mustard seeds. He looks skeptical. You sweeten the deal by offering a free nosebleed treatment. Poke the nostril with a thin twig and whisper a prayer. He declines. Some people just don't want to be helped. Lunch is a cold turnip and a moment of existential dread. You use the break to examine your medicinal supplies. You're running low on key ingredients: frog slime, powdered snail shell, and anything that could be vaguely called bomb. You send Maud to forage, which means she'll probably return with pine cones and something dead. You prepare to improvise. The next patient is the village midwife, who has a splinter. She demands opium and threatens to tell everyone you once misdiagnosed a rash as divine branding. You remove the splinter with tweezers made from 2 fish bones and offer her a calming tea of boiled moss and cider vinegar. She drinks it, burps once, and mutters that you're barely competent. You thank her. That's your best review this week. A traveling knight arrives, helmet under his arm, smelling like dried meat and arrogance. He has a lance wound in his thigh and insists you remove the splinter of wood, without damaging the honor. You nod wisely and ask for coin. He gives you a dull silver piece and a glare. You clean the wound with vinegar, dig out the splinter with a spoon, and pack it with moldy bread. Penicillin doesn't exist yet, but mold is mold. He leaves with a slight limp and a deeper appreciation for clean socks. By evening, your hands are stained brown, your robe has acquired 3 new stains of unknown origin, and your last patient is a woman who claims her husband has been hexed. He keeps singing to cabbages. You suspect head trauma. You wrap his forehead with a compress soaked in cold stream water, hand him a potato to talk to instead, and suggest a pilgrimage. If he's still singing to lettuce by the time he reaches the next town, it's someone else's problem. As darkness creeps in, you light a candle stub, write a few notes in your medical ledger, mostly doodles and guesses, and reflect on the day. You treated 15 people, only lost consciousness once, and only one patient vomited directly on your lap. That's a record. You settle into sleep on your pile of rags, dreaming of better tools, clearer instructions, and maybe a time when medicine doesn't include. Rub him with badger fat and say 3 Hail Marys. But that time isn't now. Now it's just you, the darkness, and a jar of leeches gurgling in the corner. And tomorrow? Tomorrow the village rumor mill says the mayor has kidney stones again. That means it's almost time for the medieval favorite, hot baths, shouting, and probably a regrettable use of a funnel. You can hardly wait. Sleep clings to your eyelids like stale cobwebs, but dawn tears it away with a cockcrow that sounds suspiciously like a man gargling gravel. You sit up and realize the floor is sticky, either a patient bled during the night, or Maud spilled last week's trollwort tonic again. You decide not to know. Today promises kidney stones and probably more screaming than a witch trial. The mayor's carriage arrives mid-morning, drawn by 2 horses and pushed by 4 groaning servants who look as if they, too, might be passing stones by sympathy. The mayor waddles inside clutching his belly like it holds a mutinous dragon. His face is the color of undercooked pork. His groans could curdle milk. You greet him with your most reassuring grin, only 3 teeth showing, and gesture to the stool of honor, recently wiped with something you hope was clean. You prod his abdomen. He howls. Diagnosis confirmed. Kidney stones the size of rebellious peas. Your repertoire offers 3 treatments. 1. Herbal potion so bitter it might scare the stones into fleeing. 2. Hot baths so scalding the mayor would rather confess treason than sit in them. 3. Internal dilation via metal catheter and prayer, otherwise known as the funnel of regret. You present these options with the gravitas of a bishop proclaiming Lent. He chooses the bath. You fill the washtub with water you heated over night soil fires, resourceful, if aromatic. To this you add a bouquet of nettles, mustard seeds, and something Maud swears is salamander dust. The mayor strips the linen drawers that were white during the last crusade and lowers himself in. Steam rises. So do profanities. You lead the servants in a chant to drown the noise. Out, fall stones, out! After half an hour the mayor emerges lobster-red, trembling, and swears he feels lighter. You nod sagely and prescribe 10 more sessions plus a gallon of barley water a day. He pays in coin and 2 barrels of pickled herring, which you intend never to open. Barely has the mayor's entourage rumbled away when a rider clatters up brandishing a parchment sealed with wax and melodrama. Emergency, he wheezes. Lady Isolde at the manor has collapsed after seeing a specter. You saddle the clinic's mule, who bites you for the privilege, and gallop toward nobility. Halfway there the mule remembers it hates speed, so you dismount and jog the rest, cursing the invention of ghosts. At the manor you find Lady Isolde sprawled on a chaise longue, fanning herself weakly while 2 maids wave lavender like inept swords. She claims a pale figure stalked her corridor, rattled chains, and whispered incomprehensible tax advice. Likely a servant in a sheet, but hysteria is profitable, so you diagnose phantasmic vapors. Treatment: refined sugar water, which you call elixir of seraphic tranquility, perfumed salts under the pillow, and a silver medallion purportedly blessed against spirits. It's actually a flattened spoon. She sighs, sips, and almost smiles. The Lord hands you a purse of coins heavy enough to quiet your skepticism. You promise to return for nightly exorcisms at double rate. Back home Maud greets you with good news. She found fresh leeches in the swamp. And bad news. They're currently escaping across the floor. You kneel, scooping slimy escape artists into a jar while lecturing them about loyalty. One attaches to your thumb. Free dinner for him. You flick it off into the mayor's old bathwater. Call it recycling. The afternoon parade begins. A carpenter with 2 missing fingers wants them reattached. You explain that fingers, once liberated, rarely obey reunion attempts. He suggests nailing them on. You admire his thematic consistency but prescribe a stump bomb of goose grease and rosemary, plus a leather mitten for fashion. Next, twins who share a rash in perfect symmetry. You suspect cheap ale brewed in copper vats. You daub them with a paste of clay and sheet tallow-dyed green for placebo flair. They leave itching but hopeful, arguing whether green means earthly or elvish blessing. You say both. More mystique equals higher fee. Then enters your professional rival, Brother Aloysius, the monk physician whose herbs actually smell pleasant. He bears a basket of chamomile and a smirk, here to consult on plague rumors at the abbey. You offer him a seat, wobbly, naturally, and wine spiked subtly with laxative sorrel. As he sips, you discuss symptoms, fevers, pustules, sudden death. He recommends quarantines and prayers. You nod while picturing him sprinting for a privy in 10 minutes. When he departs, clenching valiantly, you feel petty triumph. Competition is healthy, but diarrhea is healthier, for your business. A commotion outside, villagers dragging a young man who screams about demons in his skull. Reality, severe migraine and 3 days without water. You usher everyone out, give the victim willow bark tea laced with opium crumbs, your personal thunderbreaker, and bind his head with cool cabbage leaves. Within the hour he snores softly. The crowd proclaims you a miracle worker. You accept baked pies and a startled ferret as payment. Maud names the ferret apothecary and teaches it to steal buttons. Evening's golden light slants through cracked shutters as a storm brews distant thunder. You review your ledger. 23 patients, 0 confirmed deaths. Today. Supplies, nearly gone. You dispatched Maud again, this time with coins, to purchase honey, vinegar, and cloth. She returns instead with gossip. A traveling surgeon has set up outside town, promising painless operations with a crimson-handled knife. Painless? Blasphemy. You must investigate. Rain begins as you approach the makeshift pavilion. Lanterns illuminate jars of pickled things and saws polished to sinister shine. The surgeon, wearing a black mask, beckons spectators while a drummer beats suspense. On stage a farmer lies inert, stumped where his leg used to be. The surgeon flourishes his knife, declares the operation complete, and invites applause. You peer closer. The patient's eyes are glassy. The painless claim likely stems from hemlock tea. You scoff loudly. The crowd hushes. Rival showmanship ignites. You step forward, brandishing a leech jar. You announce that bloodletting of specific lunar ratios will cure gout better than leg removal. The surgeon retorts that you smell of pig pens. You suggest his knife is compensating for theological shortcomings. The audience gasps. A duel of reputations ensues, not with swords but with medical Latin, fabricated saints, and escalating claims. In the end, you cure a child's nosebleed by theatrically sneezing out the evil humors, yourself, earning cheers. The surgeon packs in a huff. Victory. Night deepens. You trudge home soaked, pockets heavier with tips and rainwater. Lightning cracks as you enter the clinic, startling apothecary the ferret, who races across shelves, knocking jars. One shatters, your prized tincture of opals and snail bile. The smell could melt iron. You and Maud spend an hour sopping the mess with straw while gagging poetic curses. Exhausted, you collapse on your rags, the storm drumming lullabies on the roof. You whisper a prayer to Saint Camillus, patron of the sick and those who make them sicker. Your hands throb, nails black with dirt. Your mind buzzes with tomorrow's list. Bleed the baker's wife, inspect the tanner's mysterious spots, and confront the abbey's plague rumors before they confront you. As sleep claims you, you dream of the future. Imaginary halls of marble, gleaming scalpels that don't rust, doctors who wash hands between cadavers and bannock. You almost believe such wonders will exist. Then thunder booms, A leech slaps wetly against your cheek, and reality yanks you back. Progress is centuries away. For now, you are the closest thing this village has to hope. And oddly enough, that's enough to make you grin into the dark, because in a world of dirty hands, bad advice, and hungry leeches, being slightly less deadly than yesterday is practically sainthood. The roosters haven't even started scheming yet when your day begins with violent banging on the door. Someone's either dying or dramatically bored. You jolt upright, knocking over a bowl of Maud's beetroot poultice, which promptly stains your only tunic the shade of suspicious crime. Outside stands a knight. Not just any knight, Sir Gervais the gravel-spined, famous mostly for losing justs and shouting at bread. He's sweating, limping, and smells like fermented despair. "Boil me bones first," he groans, collapsing onto your table. You oblige, figuratively, beginning with a cursory examination. What you find could write its own cautionary ballad: festering saddle sores, a cracked rib, and something involving his foot that appears to be both fungal and philosophical. He demands your best treatment. You offer him, too, your new tonic of tenacity, mostly vinegar, pepper, and hope, and a light cauterization of the offending regions. He chooses both. You drink the tonic in sympathy, then heat the iron. Gervais howls loud enough to scatter birds in 3 counties. When it's over, he thanks you with a half-chewed coin and a sausage link from 1297. Maud adds it to your "things will burn later" pile. No sooner does he stagger off than your apprentice yells, "She's back!" You know exactly who. Old Widow Annis, infamous for claiming every imaginable ailment, including, once, haunted knees. Today it's inverted bile. You nod gravely, pretend to examine her, and prescribe onion broth and 2 days of silence. She accepts the first, glares at the second, and mutters something that might be a curse or just her chewing. Outside, the villagers gather, whispering about plague. Always the plague. Someone saw a rat sneeze, someone else's cousin fainted after seeing a bruised apple, and now they want answers. You sigh and deliver your classic speech. A plague is not confirmed until 3 chickens spontaneously die in the shape of a skull. They nod. Satisfied. You've bought yourself 48 hours of peace. Then comes a messenger from the abbey, panic in a robe. Brother Clement has turned green. He pants. You grab your satchel of emergency remedies: dried frog skins, 3 leeches, and your holy relic, a tooth you swear belonged to Saint Sebastian's donkey. You gallop over on your mule, whose name is now technically still kicking. At the abbey, Brother Clement is, in fact, green. Mostly because he mistook a barrel of pickling brine for cider. You induce vomiting with dramatic flair, then prescribe prayer, a bucket, and sobriety. The monks thank you with a wheel of cheese and a suspiciously friendly cat. Maud names it tincture. You barely make it home before a nobleman bursts in, dragging his wife, who is shrieking about demons, betrayal, and mutton. Diagnosis: hysteria, marital strife, and poorly cooked dinner. You perform a quick ceremony involving sage smoke, chanting in fake Latin, and tapping her gently with a loaf of bread. She declares herself cured. The husband pays you in silver and the promise to never return. You consider that your actual fee. Afternoon brings a philosophical farmer who wants to debate whether a cow can be possessed by envy. You say yes, it helps sales. He buys your anti-envy salve, butter, garlic, and a carved potato, and leaves content. You then spend 10 minutes questioning your own life choices while applying leech lotion to your forearm, which Maud insists prevents wrinkles. It doesn't. Then come the pilgrims. They heard you resurrected a duck. You didn't, it just woke up late. They bring offerings: a broken flute, 3 radishes, and a map to the holy mole of Westfen. You nod wisely, pretend to examine the map, and offer them protective amulets made from leftover chicken bones. They leave singing your praises. You leave wondering how long until they realize their holy mole is just a startled badger. As the sun sets, a thief arrives, bloody, wheezing, stabbed somewhere in the confusion of ribs and moral ambiguity. He offers coin if you don't ask questions. You patch him up using your sharpest needle, your last bottle of barley wine antiseptic, and what might be duck's sinew. He limps away grunting thanks. You wash your hands in stale mead and call it hygiene. Late evening. The leeches are fed. Apothecary the ferret has stolen 3 buttons and half a bandage roll. Tincture the cat watches it all with saintly judgment. Maud announces she's invented a cream that removes curses. You don't ask how. You do ask where your shoe went. No answer. Finally, quiet. You sit with your ledger. Today's highlights: 19 patients, 1 duel with a masked surgeon, 4 possibly cursed items, 1 leech escape, and 0 confirmed deaths. Not bad. The moon hangs high. Your bones ache like relics. You sip your personal tonic, a blend of cider, sassafras, and crushed regret. In this world of superstition, chaos, and occasional spoon-based injuries, you've carved a space, muddy, smelly, barely solvent, but yours. You've survived another day, tricked death, sold salt as holy dust, and avoided a second branding. That's a win. Tomorrow brings boils, heartbreak, and possibly another rat-based scandal. But tonight you're a healer, a fraud, a minor miracle in muddy boots. You whisper a prayer to Saint Scholastica, patron of headaches and sarcasm, and let the darkness take you. After all, in the grand theater of medieval medicine, you are both actor and audience, and with any luck, you'll live long enough to invent the sequel, sanitation. Ever imagine trading freedom for a haircut that looks like a target, waking at 2 a.m. just to chant in Latin you barely grasp, and surviving on soup so bland even the rats file complaints? Welcome to the monk life, equal parts piety, powdered chalk, and pre-industrial insomnia. Stick around. Your spiritual journey may include chronic back pain and a lifelong romance with silence. The first thing you learn in the monastery is that the sun is a lazy heathen. You, by contrast, rise when the night is still muttering about overtime. The bell, an iron throat clearing in the dark, shreds your sleep at matins, roughly 2 hours after you fell into it. You roll off the wooden plank the abbot swears is a mattress, fumble for your sandals in pitch-black chill, and shuffle toward the chapel like a half-frozen moth seeking misery's flame. Talking is forbidden, which is handy because your mouth is too numb for vowels anyway. Inside the chapel, candles hiss and monks stand like rows of beige question marks waiting for the answer to be daylight. Someone intones the opening antiphon, a melody composed by people who clearly romanticize suffering. You chant psalms for an hour, Latin syllables sticking to your teeth like cold porridge, while your stomach conducts its own percussion symphony, rumble, groan, despair. The abbot claims hunger sharpens devotion. Judging by the growls echoing down the nave, the community is practically archangelic. Lauds follows at dawn. More chanting, more kneeling, more staring at stained glass that depicts saints smiling through martyrdom, obviously gossiping about amateurs who complain after 2 vigils. When the final amen drifts into sleep-deprived silence, you shuffle to the refectory for the day's first meal, cereal of barley and penance. The cook, Brother Cormac, ladles a grayish gruel with the consistency of moral ambiguity. If you're lucky, there's honey. If not, there's yesterday's crusted leftovers floating like theological icebergs. You eat anyway. Second helpings exist only in legends recited to warn novices about gluttony. After breakfast comes chapter, morning meeting for spiritual pep talks and public shaming. The abbot reads a passage from St. Benedict's rule just in case anyone forgot humility was mandatory. Then miscreants stand and confess sins. Brother Eustace slept through part of matins. Brother Theobald used a quill without permission. Brother Gerard passed gas during the Magnificat. Each offender receives a silent nod or, on a bad day, extra weeding duty. The system works because monks fear weeding more than hell. Work period begins. Today you're assigned to the scriptorium, the medieval cubicle farm where manuscripts crawl from parchment to eternity. You perch on a stool designed for maximum scoliosis and dip a quill into ink blacker than your social life. The manuscript in front of you is a bestiary, detailing moral lessons of beasts no one has seen, like unicorns and cheerful tax collectors. Your job: replicate each flamboyant letter and marginal doodle without dripping ink or daydreaming about bread. Every blot is a sin, every yawn a slippery slope toward heresy. Meanwhile, Brother Illuminatus beside you paints an ostrich wearing pilgrim boots, pausing only to remind you that ostriches symbolize faith. You nod because arguing would extend the workday into purgatory. After 3 hours your hands tremble like leaves on Judgment Day. A bell rings for terce, calling you back to the chapel for more psalms. You stand, bones cracking like old door hinges, and shuffle along. Terce is shorter, mercifully, but concentration is harder now that your bladder is petitioning for release. You endure, chanting flat notes that flutter against stone walls older than most saints. Finally, amen. Flush of relief? Not yet. There's no personal time in God's schedule. Back in the scriptorium, you realize copying holiness is a marathon, not a sprint. Ink fumes settle in your lungs like sinful clouds. The quill splinters. You fetch another, trimmed from a goose that undoubtedly cursed your bloodline with each pluck. You whisper a quick apology to the bird, inaudible, of course, vow of silence, then resume. Your elbows ache, your eyes blur, and every letter begins to look like divine judgment. Mid-paragraph, you blotch a capital. Q. Panic. You quickly morph the stain into a decorative vine. Perfect. Artistic improvisation disguised as piety. Sexth midday prayer rescues you from ink-soaked despair. Another procession to the chapel, another round of murmured Latin punctuated by stomachs howling for anything edible. When the final chant dissolves, you march to the refectory for dinner, the main meal. Lentil soup, coarse bread, and maybe a square of cheese if the cows felt charitable. Conversation remains banned. Instead, one monk stands on a creaking platform reading hagiographies about saints who survived on dew and divine light. As you digest bean broth that tastes like sanctified mud, you conclude those saints clearly never met Brother Cormac's cooking. Post-meal recreation lasts the time it takes to contemplate existence, roughly 15 minutes. You might walk the cloister, counting cracks in the stone, or tend vegetables in silence. Gardening is therapy with weeds as confessor. Pull one, erase a sin. By the time you finish the beet row, you're practically immaculate, if slightly muddy. None, the mid-afternoon office, summons you again. The chant now floats on sunlight slanting through dusty windows. You fight a yawn and lose. Brother Peregrine elbows you, his silent reminder that sloth is a gateway vice. You mouth, sorry, like a sinner auditioning for redemption. Work resumes but shifts location, the brewery. Monasteries make ale because hydration is holy, and water alone is basically a plague invitation. You stir a vat of barley mash while hot steam opens your pores and clogs them with yeast simultaneously. The air smells of bread dreams and forgotten hygiene. Brother Malachi tests the brew, swears it's divine, and tops off your cup. You sip grateful. One perk of monkhood, tipsy is liturgical. Vespers rolls in with sunset. Candles flicker, shadows stretch, and the day's final long office begins. Voices weave harmonies that brush heaven's ceiling, at least that's the goal. Your throat, abused since midnight, cracks like a dry twig. You keep singing because quitting equals penance, and penance equals scrubbing latrines with icy water at 4 a.m. Supper, a whisper of a meal, consists of leftover barley mash baked into curious lumps. Brother Cormac calls them holy patties. Everyone else calls them edible stones. You chew thoughtfully, plotting which patron saint might intervene in the kitchen. St. Lawrence, maybe. He was grilled, so he'd sympathize. Compline closes the liturgical loop. Final chants fade into night, candles snuffed one by one, and you retreat to the dormitory. You strip to your chemise, scratch bug bites the rule insists aren't there, and bless the wooden board you call a bed. Before sleep, you reflect on the spiritual victories of the day. You copied 15 pages, sinned only in imagination, avoided latrine duty, and maybe fermented half-decent ale. Monk's scoreboard, satisfactory. Silence blankets the dormitory. But just as dreams beckon, the novice in the cot beside you whispers that he thinks the relic cupboard is haunted. You sigh. Breaking silence is a sin, but so is ignoring a terrified soul. You whisper back that ghosts prefer wealthy cathedrals. This monastery is too poor for afterlife tourism. He chuckles. Sinful laughter floats upward. Somewhere, a saint sighs. You both vow extra prayers tomorrow. Eyes close. Muscles unclench. For a breath, peace. Then the bell towers roar, midnight. Vigils again. You fling off the blanket, stumble toward darkness, and think, tomorrow, definitely you'll become a hermit. Chanting, more talking to trees. Trees, at least, never schedule matins at 2 in the morning. Welcome to day 1. Only a lifetime to go. You've now survived your first full day as a medieval monk, a feat that should qualify you for sainthood, or at least a commemorative soup bowl. But no time to celebrate. It's morning again, and that bell ringing at an hour when bats are still yawning means only one thing: the Lord is awake, and so are you. The second day begins much like the first, with regret, wooden sandals, and a bleak understanding that this is not a phase, it's forever. The morning air slices through your robe as you line up for matins, eyes bloodshot, soul still reeling from the fact that the dormitory goose, kept for feather plucking and alarm duties, honked its head off all night due to a phantom mouse. You chant. You kneel. You stand. Repeat until your knees stop making noise and start issuing legal threats. By now, your body has accepted the monastery's rhythm like a prisoner adjusting to their cellmates, snoring, not joyfully, but inevitably. There is peace, perhaps, in the repetition. Or maybe that's just brain fog. Either way, the sun finally rises, casting long golden beams across the chapel floor, gorgeous beams that fall exactly on the one monk who always manages to fall asleep mid-prayer with his mouth open. After lauds and a breakfast of nutritive sludge, you're assigned garden duty. Glorious, you think, outdoors, sunshine, fresh air. A brief moment of rural bliss. That is, until you're waist-deep in cabbages being pecked by a disgruntled chicken with boundary issues. Monks don't name the animals, but you've quietly christened this one judgment clucker, as she seems determined to test your vow of nonviolence. Weeding, digging, hoeing, it's honest work, but the tools are older than sin itself. The shovel wobbles like it's one blessing short of collapse, and the hoe was last sharpened during the Norman conquest. You dig anyway. Not because you love vegetables, but because Brother Bede in the scriptorium has a chronic case of sanctimonious sighing, and one more hour of his breathy disapproval might drive you into apostasy. Back to the chapel fratres, because God wants hourly updates. You chant psalms with such mechanical precision that you accidentally harmonize with the monk next to you, prompting a head turn from the choirmaster, who suspects intentional joy. You both break eye contact and immediately start coughing to prove you're still miserable. Then it's time for more copy. The abbot says, "A monk's pen is his plow. But today yours feels more like a punishment stick dipped in crow blood." Your hand cramps after 3 paragraphs, and you've begun to hallucinate letters rearranging themselves into Latin insults. You blink and swear the illuminated letter, E, just mocked your hairline. Beside you, Brother Illuminatus is working on a margin depicting St. Jerome wrestling a lion while simultaneously doing calligraphy. You glance at your own page. Just 2 paragraphs and a suspicious ink smear that looks like a squashed beetle. Not quite divine inspiration, but you assure yourself even holy texts need some personality. Sext arrives with the grace of a tired uncle crashing a party. You shuffle into the chapel once more, where the pews are now slightly warped by time, devotion, and approximately 900 years of but impressions. You consider the spiritual significance of splinters. You chant. Lunchtime. the big meal of the day. Rumors swirl that today's stew includes root vegetables that actually taste like something. These rumors are false. The stew is brown, ambiguous, and capable of standing up without a bowl. You eat it because you have no choice. The bread, however, is solid. And by solid, we mean physically. There's a reason monks have excellent jaw strength. During mealtime readings, today's saint of choice is Saint Simeon Stylites, the one who lived on top of a pillar for 37 years. You nod solemnly while internally screaming. Same, but emotionally. As the lector drones on about ascetic feats, Brother Cormac mutters that at least Simeon never had to eat his own lentil bake 3 days in a row. You both cross yourselves and chew in penitential silence. Postmeal brings recreation, or as it's known in the monastery, silent pacing. You walk the cloister. Left. Turn. Right. Turn. Occasionally you pass Brother Oswin, who whispers scandalous things like, "I once dreamed of butter." You nod. Butter is practically pornography at this point. Back to work. Today, the abbot decides to inspect the wine cellar, which means you, as the youngest, are volunteered to go into the chilly stone crypt beneath the kitchen and count the casks. It's dark, it's damp, and it smells like if guilt had a scent. You light a taper and whisper prayers to every saint you can remember, especially Saint Bibiana, patroness of hangovers, because some of these barrels are labeled, "Miracle wine do not touch." You make it out alive, barely, and return to the daylight squinting like you've been reborn. Brother Malachi congratulates you and immediately conscripts you to help him refill the monastery's beer barrels. Brewing is a sacred art here. Not because monks are party animals, but because the water is full of deadly microbes and ale is how you avoid dying from your own thirst. Truly, God works in intoxicating ways. Evening creeps in. Vespers is longer tonight because the choir master found a new hymn he claims was written by an angel. You suspect the angel was tone deaf. Still, you chant along while praying silently for night to fall faster than the Latin syllables escaping your dry throat. Supper is lighter. Bread. Broth. Possibly a bean. You find a hair in yours and thank the Lord, extra protein. You eat quickly, because Brother Alfric has started humming again, and his humming always precedes a theological rant that ends with someone being accused of improper soup posture. Compline. The final prayers. You're nearly free. You chant, eyes closed, soul hovering somewhere between devotion and sheer exhaustion. Someone behind you snores. Someone else sneezes so violently that half the nave flinches. You all pretend it didn't happen. It's part of the rule. Back in the dormitory, you lie down. You think about how your name is now Brother Anselm, but your soul still occasionally answers to Steve. You scratch at the itchy part of your robe, curse the fleas in your mind, because out loud curses are frowned upon, and close your eyes. Then, just as you drift off, Brother Catalate rolls over and farts audibly. No one laughs. But in the darkness, spiritual warfare is quietly fought between the desire to giggle and the fear of eternal damnation. Tomorrow, more psalms. More soup. More silence. You're not sure if you're becoming more holy or just more sleep-deprived. But hey, you've gone 2 days without being excommunicated or spontaneously combusting from boredom. That's basically monk progress. Only 40 more years to go. Morning once again. You wake up with your spine shaped like a question mark and your soul asking, why? The bell tolls. Of course it does. Because nothing says, God loves you. Quite like a 2 a.m. summons to whisper sing in an unheated stone box while fasting. You stumble into the chapel. The floor is colder than your social life. You begin chanting. Again. By now, your brain has 2 modes, Gregorian and despair. But you're starting to notice patterns. Psalms about suffering? Check. Psalms about deliverance? Sure. Psalms that are basically just David complaining in iambic pentameter? Absolutely. You find comfort in that. Even the holy are petty at 4 a.m. After lauds and another hot bowl of grain-flavored sorrow, you're sent to the fish ponds. A serene task, you think. How foolish. Because you're not here to feed the fish. You're here to catch eels. With your hands. In mud that feels suspiciously warm and smells like Satan's footbath. Eels, by the way, are slippery like theological debates and twice as mean. Brother Ethelred claims one once bit him and gave him visions of St. John. You suspect the visions were just mild sepsis. Back in the cloister, you drip eel slime onto your sandals as Brother Malachi passes, offering a boiled turnip and a cheerful observation. You smell like purgatory. You thank him. That's the nicest thing anyone said all month. Terce arrives. You limp to the chapel again. This time, your knees creak like medieval door hinges. The chanting is slower today, possibly because half the choir looks like they're processing early onset scurvy. The choirmaster raises an eyebrow. You all increase volume by 4%. It's enough to avoid a lecture on joyful humility. Then you're back to the scriptorium. Today's task? A copy of Deuteronomy. Hooray, legal codes written in the 7th century BC. By the 4th page, you're convinced Moses would have approved of punctuation. You sneeze and blot the page. Brother Illuminatus gasps like you just kissed a nun. You smear the blotch into a tiny dragon and pretend it's a divine metaphor. Lunch is barley stew. Again. With cabbage this time. Progress. The reader today recites the biography of a 10th century hermit who lived in a cave, wore moss, and communicated only through interpretive coughing. The moral? Silence is golden. You quietly hope the next reader forgets how to pronounce. Hagiography. Post-lunch recreation is brief. You play. Guess that saint. With Brother Oswin, who's made it weird by describing every saint as either the one with the eyeballs, or the one who burst into flames. Eventually, you excuse yourself to weed the herb garden. Even nettles are less prickly than Oswin's imagination. None arrives. More chanting. You feel your soul leaving your body and filing a formal complaint. Your voice is a raspy whisper now, held together by tea and divine mercy. Brother Theobald audibly burps during the psalm. No one reacts, either because they're holy, or just numb. After that, you're assigned penance chores. The abbot hands you a bucket and points to the latrines. You don't ask why. You know why. Because yesterday, you accidentally hummed a secular tune while hoeing turnips. Greensleeves, or something like it. The abbot called it the devil's lullaby. Now you're cleaning the trench that receives the gifts of 60 rogue men on a lentil-based diet. You descend into the pit. The smell is legendary. You briefly wonder if this is where saints go to test their resolve. A rat stares at you. You stare back. Neither of you blink. In that moment, there is understanding. You survive. Just barely. You wash in the freezing stream, where ice and fish bones float past you like medieval life advice. Cold, unexpected, and vaguely hostile. Then it's time to help in the infirmary. Brother Cyprian is sick again. Possibly plague, possibly indigestion, possibly both. It's hard to tell when all the treatments are wine, leeches, or prayers. You hold a bowl while Brother Medicus applies a hot onion poultice to Cyprian's chest and declares, "The phlegm is fleeing." You nod, though you're 80% sure the phlegm was just an unfortunate frog. Vespers arrives. You chant with a little more gusto, not out of piety but because your hands are finally warm from holding a steaming bucket of sick soup all afternoon. The abbot smiles. You wonder if he knows you're faking inner peace like a champ. Dinner. It's oats. Not porridge, not stew. Just oats. Plain, lumpy, and allegedly consecrated. You eat them slowly, contemplating the spiritual symbolism of blandness. Maybe sanctity tastes like wallpaper paste. Maybe that's the point. Compline. Final prayers. A hymn about light in the darkness. You cling to that line. The darkness you've got. The light? Still waiting. But hope is a virtue, and your virtue list is getting thin. In the dormitory, you collapse onto your board bed and try not to cry. Brother Alfred mutters in his sleep about cheese. You envy his dreams. Cheese is forbidden right now, too luxurious, too joyful. You stare at the ceiling, counting splinters. And then it happens. The bell rings again. Not matins. Not a vigil. Emergency. You scramble outside. The barn is on fire. A lightning strike. The night is chaos. Shouting monks, fleeing chickens, Brother Oswin trying to douse flames with a bucket full of leeches. You grab a jug of water and do your best, choking on smoke and adrenaline. Hours later, the fire is out. The barn is gone. The hayloft smolders. Everyone's covered in soot. The abbot declares it a test of faith. You privately declare it a sign to never build barns near lightning rods that haven't been invented yet. You finally return to bed at dawn. Just in time for matins. Of course. No sleep. No silence. No cheese. Monk life. And you're only halfway through the week. It's the third week of Lent, which means no meat, no eggs, no joy, and definitely no questioning why the abbot still smells faintly of ham. Today's breakfast is a broth so thin it qualifies as a theological metaphor. One sip and you've already sinned by thinking about bacon. You recite your morning prayers with the enthusiasm of a wilted cabbage. Everyone looks half dead, and Brother Reginald is openly weeping into his psalter, but no one comments. It's a spiritual discipline, or just dehydration. Once prayers are done, you're marched to the monastery's outer wall to help repair crumbling stones. Monks are not stonemasons. You prove this by accidentally braining Brother Pius with a chunk of limestone while trying to look competent with a chisel. He forgives you. Sort of. But you know the next time he's on bread duty, your slice will mysteriously be the heel. After wall duty, you're assigned library maintenance. Sounds serene, right? Wrong. The library is freezing, the manuscripts are covered in mildew, and the only candle is down to a stub. You're instructed to clean every vellum page with a damp cloth and absolute terror, because some of these books are priceless, and also possibly haunted. One of them hums. During sex prayers, you almost fall asleep mid-chant and are nudged awake by Brother Norbert's elbow, which is not gentle. In retaliation, you quietly switch his candle for a smaller one during evening study. Revenge in the monastery is petty, passive-aggressive, and surprisingly satisfying. Lunch is boiled carrots, oat mash, and the despair of 3 generations. You eat while a senior monk gives a lecture on the virtues of humility, which he delivers while polishing his golden crucifix. You try not to choke on the irony or the oat lump that tastes suspiciously like candle wax. After lunch, you're sent on an errand to the nearby village to procure, wait for it, turnips. The monks are low on vegetables, and apparently this is now your life. You are a divine errand boy. You walk for 3 miles through ankle-deep mud, get chased by a goose, then haggle with a toothless farmer named Hob who insists that the turnips are pre-blessed. You don't ask what that means. You buy them, though, because the abbot said to, and Hob has a very large scythe. On your way back you trip, drop the turnips, and one rolls directly into a puddle full of something you hope is only manure. You pick it up, wipe it off with your robe sleeve, and consider that spiritual purity must include gastrointestinal risk. Back at the monastery you're late. The abbot frowns. You bow and say, "A goose delayed me." He nods solemnly. Everyone has a goose story. You are not special. Vespers again. You chant like a haunted music box, slow and slightly broken. One monk hiccups during the Magnificat, and no one even reacts. This is how numb you've all become. After prayers, Brother Oswin corners you and starts a theological debate about whether saints can get sunburned in heaven. You try to walk away, but he follows. You pretend to hear a call from the kitchen. He follows. You finally escape by pretending to have a vision. He looks offended and mutters something about your soul being lukewarm soup. Dinner is lentils and water. You miss chewing. You miss flavor. You miss your teeth not vibrating from malnutrition. A novice passes out mid-meal and is revived with a splash of blessed vinegar. He thanks everyone. The gratitude is real. Compline. One final prayer. One final chance for your voice to crack during the psalm and be judged by a room full of men who haven't blinked since Easter. Then the big event, night silence. You are not allowed to speak until dawn unless it's a medical emergency, divine visitation, or the fire bell rings again. But since none of those things are happening, yet, you slink off to your straw mat, wrap yourself in your thin wool blanket, and stare at the wooden beams above your head. You think about life before the monastery. You were a shepherd, or a farmer's second son, or just someone who lost a bet. But here you are, now sworn to poverty, obedience, and the daily rhythm of prayer and manual labor that grinds your soul into something that vaguely resembles faith, or madness. A mouse runs across your pillow. You name it Gregory and whisper your confessions to it. It doesn't judge you. It just squeaks, poops, and leaves. You consider this a valid spiritual encounter. Somewhere near midnight, the bells ring again. Matins. Of course. You trudge back to the chapel, chanting in a fog of exhaustion, hunger, and mild regret. You realize Brother Bartholomew has been dead asleep for the last 3 services, and no one's noticed. You envy his audacity. You might fake your own death just for a nap. The moonlight spills through stained glass. The chill makes your hands go numb. You drop your prayer book and accidentally step on Brother Felix's foot. He mutters, "Blessings," but you're pretty sure it was sarcastic. And then morning. Again. Because that's monastic life. It doesn't stop. No weekends. No breaks. No Netflix. Just God, dirt, prayer, oats, and more God. But strangely, you start to feel a kind of rhythm. A numbing consistency. A strange sense of peace that comes from not needing to make choices. From living a life so rigid it can't break you because you're already bent into its shape. And maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point. Or maybe the moldy stew has finally gotten to your brain. Either way, the bell is ringing again. You'd better move. God's waiting. And he really likes punctuality.